everyone. Welcome to the Simply Trade podcast. We have another roundup today, talking on anything that's happening during the week. I'm kind of segmenting off today, and I think we sometimes do that a little bit just because, things are going on everywhere around the world. So we need to leave the US behind. But first, let me introduce myself. My name's Annik. If you have not been listening to the Simply Trade podcast, which the roundup is out every Monday. So if you're listening to this on the Monday, you're probably one of the top, listeners. Not sure how many. All right. Well, what was I going to say? Oh, yes. I want to mention that this week we had some crazy news with Trump or the US government and China, which they supposedly made a deal. It has to be approved by both presidents, but hopefully we'll see that soon and then we'll talk about it. But there's not much to talk about, there's just words everywhere and everyone's speculating, but speculating doesn't help anything at this moment. So with further ado, I have an exciting guest here with me today. And if you're watching, you'll see my shirt. Oh, will you? Should I stand up? There you go. You should watch now. It says, I love Paris. And I unintentionally wore this, actually. This is so funny. And then I realized my guest is in France. So I'm going to welcome Bonnie Gutz. And I hope I spelled that right?
You spelled it right, but it's good. It's technically like a German name, so you got an umlaut over it.
She's an international trade consultant, which she operates from Europe, France per se, and I love France, so that's amazing. She's also just started an association, which is the European Trade Association in Europe, correct? And it's for all people to kind of get together in Europe and create more of a community sense, because I don't know, you can go into that because it seems like there's not much of a community in trade there than it is in Europe. Anyways, trade. Wow. Well, we wanted to jump into the European side a little bit more because we've been talking US a lot, Canada, Mexico, but we haven't heard from the EU and what's happening. And I think we need to go back a little and see what the differences are, or like where Europe even stands with this whole thing, because we see the United States acting, and there's so much change happening every single day, while the Europeans are like, all right, what are we going to do? And I don't really know what they're doing. So you're here to tell us, and I'm kind of happy for that. So do you want to kind of lead with what's going on, or like where their approach is coming from?
Yeah, so I want to start with a disclaimer, because any Europeans watching this is my perception of what's happening here in the EU. And I will start off by saying that, the EU is the European Union, right? So it is a union of states, but many of the states or countries, they act very independently. So it's quite segmented. So, the posture, while it is conclusive of the European Union, you see a lot of differences between how Germany is reacting to the trade posture, or Italy, or Germany, or France. So there is like quite a bit of segments that that are happening. And I think that also speaks to like the alignment. But so I'm only going to be covering the EU. So what's being at a regulatory level being published by the European Commission. And that's why I put that disclaimer in there, because Germany might come out and be like, well, the auto industry doesn't agree with that regulatory. We're trying to, we're trying to lobby against it. And we do see, that is one thing that in the posture of the EU that I see a big difference in, is that, the European Commission is very open to communicating with businesses. So what I'm seeing over in the US is like, hey, the administration is, really putting a regulatory change in place overnight without any type of consultation with the local businesses there, right? Or with the local industries. And that's a really negative impact in my perception, but you don't really see that here in the EU. So, but as at a high level, the European Commission and Europe in general is a very risk adverse group of people.
Yeah, I think it comes back to like the the European itself, like the person itself, like it kind of reflects right onto what they're doing and like their regulatory, like the changes to what's going on and how they're reacting, because it's reflective.
Yeah, and you're right. Absolutely. Like the European person is also risk adverse. I mean, that's why they have some of the highest savings accounts around the globe, right? Like they're like always preparing for the next thing. Maybe this comes from World War II or something. I don't know because I wasn't here, but they're very risk adverse, and they implement systems, long-term systems. And so this is really where it gets kind of dicey because, their protection, right? So that's kind of like the momentum that the U.S. is going into, right? A really protectionist position. But historically, the EU has always been like that. And so they've created these long-term systems to protect industries, to protect, the countries as a whole. So, we still see that, but we do see a lot of changes in that posture, which I'll go into. But I do want to mention that, it's a risk adverse as a whole, the European Union, where I think in the US, especially what we're seeing right now is like, oh yeah, we're going to make this regulatory change and we're not even going to evaluate the risks that are associated with, all of these, small businesses might fail, but at least these 10 companies, will be able to prosper. And so like, that's not happening here, guys.
Yeah. I have to say, I feel like in Europe, there's many more small businesses, right? I mean, I feel like it's just thriving off small businesses.
Yeah, I mean, I go to a cheesemonger and then I go to my boucherie, which is the meat shop, and then I go to my boulangerie, which is the bread. So you're right; these are small businesses. These are not like a big supermarket that I'm going into to buy food. I'm just taking this down at like at a everyday level, right? Like there are small businesses, and that is how a lot of the EU operates. In the international trade world, I don't see that as much. So like, I'm not going to see that boulangerie, internationally shipping their products though. And I think that a lot of that is because there's not as much manufacturing here. But risk adverse. They're also rules based. The EU Commission is, and I think this is where the Europeans will be like, yes, at least she nailed this. Is that they put a lot of rules in place. So the regulatory framework here is quite robust. And there's like two sides to the coin here. Is like, now that we're in like this trade war around the world, that's how I look at it. Cause like kind of everybody is trying to like fight for their own right now. This regulatory structure, like a really tight regulatory structure, is really protecting a lot of the local in industries from that, right? But at the same time, what I have seen is that there's a lot of businesses that are saying like, you're holding us back, right? Like you have all these rules and you can't develop or you can't build new things because there's all this regulatory control. So there's a little bit of both sides to the fact that there's so much regulatory control here in the EU. Like it's a pro and a con depending on which perspective that you're taking it.
Yeah. No, I would say I agree. And again, this is in personal life and within like the industry and the trade, like the trade industry, because it's like, okay, Sundays you don't throw away bottles. I'm just putting it into my perspective, like what I know, and I can totally see how that reflects also onto the industries. Like Sundays don't throw away glass bottles, right? Because it's the disturbance of other people. Well, that's how it is in Germany. Not sure how it is in France.
No, it's totally annoying too. And I feel like we should probably caveat that with what is, glass recycling? Because I'm not sure that I've seen a lot of that in the US.
Yeah, I don't think we do it. I actually get weirded out every time I throw my glass into the trash. I'm like,
Yeah.
does this belong here? This belongs somewhere else, guys.
Yeah, there should go to a special bin.
Yes, it's weird. Like I should have a bag, because that's how I would do it. Have a bag with all my glassware and then bring it to the grocery store and then, give it off to the people like that, and they take it and I'll get money back sometimes. And it's nice.
Yeah.
But I think like that's the same when it comes to the framework. Like there's so many rules, and And the United States is also, they don't operate that way. So they're not even familiar with that. They're like, well, it comes down, we're not getting into that, but it comes down to sustainability. The United States is like, what? We have to follow what?
Yes, I feel like that should be our follow-up podcast because you're right. There's so many rules. There's so many rules in place for sustainability and protecting. The ESG is still very big here. I know that the U.S. is kind of working their way away from environmental protection, but the EU is like the champion of this. Like if they walk away from it, who is the champion anymore? You have the Paris Climate Accord, and so even trade and we see that, right? We see in the EU. ESG or environmental protection being weaponized through trade, right? So we have, and I know that we're not going into this. I'm just going to get a high level because I can't not talk about it. But like we have CBAM, which is carbon emissions cap, meaning like if you're using X amount of carbon, if you're exceeding the limit, then you got to pay, right? You got to pay to play. And so you see these rules being weaponized in trade and really revenue generators for the EU. So
yeah, and I kind of want to go into that. So like the US is making all these changes, right? Like that the EU has to abide by. I mean, the tariffs, like it obviously comes on to EU businesses because they have to deal with it. And now that we kind of talked about their mindset and their how they approach things, like being very different than the United States, what is happening? Like what are they doing?
Yeah, no, that's where it gets really interesting, and I'm actually very impressed. I see a lot of more proactive work happening here in the EU. While we don't have the 50% tariffs, I don't think in place yet, but there's a lot of proactive work that's happening on the ground right now. So, and it's really interesting because like I wrote an article about this. I published on LinkedIn, so anybody that's watching, go and check it out. It's on my page, where it goes into this new monitoring tool that the EU has devised. Or designed to leverage EU diversion to the EU. So the way that the EU is looking at this, which they're playing chess here, they're thinking 3 steps ahead, is like, okay, the US has put these barriers on Chinese made products. And so the EU is like, well, what is China going to do with all those products now? And so they've built a tool to monitor trade activity, and identify diversions to Europe, and have then put in a system of anti-dumping rules. So we've seen a lot of changes in the anti-dumping. So you're seeing it's an AI tool. Yes. And that's also something I'm like really impressed with, is that I've met with many founders here in the EU that are developing AI tools for trade. And so you have them all the way up in the government, which I think that the US is doing something similar because
they have a lot of AI tools like duty drawback and like the new tariffs, obviously the new tariffs, how to calculate blah 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 AI. And then they also have, I mean, it's just governmental, and then on the lower level they do too. So I didn't know the EU has that, because I always feel like the EU is a little bit slower when it comes to tech. Even though they're so progressive, they're still a little slower because they like to do things the way they've been doing. I feel like
not only that, but there comes back to those rules, right? It's quite bureaucratic here. So to develop a new AI tool, I mean, that the EU had came out with an AI Act, which basically put controls into AI, and I mean that really stifled the development of AI tools here. And what we have seen since the trade war started is the EU Commission now coming out and saying, okay, we do not want to stifle any type of entrepreneurship or development of AI. So you see a lot of walk back on that. And like I said, personally, I've been meeting with founders here, developers and founders here in the EU that are developing these tools. And I think one thing that I'm seeing that's quite nice is that there's development here and there's a push for EU tools to be used, right? So, okay, the US already has all these tools, such as you mentioned, the duty drawback. So, I mean, we don't have duty drawback here, but classification tools, for example, the US already has these things, but what you see here in the EU is, let's build it here at home and let's use our home tools rather than using the tools from the US. And so that is automatically driving like this growth in AI tools here.
Creating jobs too. Okay, that's nice. That's nice. That I like that. And I mean, that's what the US is kind of doing too. We want to use our own products. We need to make money here. So I agree with that. I mean, we need to be interactive as countries, and the EU needs to work with the US and the US needs to work with the EU. But, let's make that happen. So, we can create revenue and make that money. And
yeah, I'm a trained economist at heart. So that's what my formal studies in. And I really do believe in equilibriums for countries, right? Where you can find the equilibrium between your production and your sale, right? Like how much do you keep at home for your own use and how much do you sell and how much do you import? I believe that there's a happy medium there. But so yes, we see the AI tool, the growth here. So there's a big push for that here. And so we see real-time surveillance of trade, so imports into the EU, and they have a whole task force that's been dedicated to this surveillance, right? So I feel like that is I think that's proactive here, and I haven't seen that in the US yet.
So when did this task force establish?
It was established a few months ago, but they only came out with the press release on it last week. So it's been in the works for a while, but they developed the task force a few months ago. I can't remember the exact date.
And what do they exactly do?
Yeah, so they are... yeah, no, that's so good. I feel like we should get one of them on the podcast. Be like, what is it that you do around here?
Yeah, no, I really am curious. Like, are they monitoring imports? Are they monitoring the tariffs?
Right. So they are monitoring imports as a whole. So, I mean, I think that the tool can be extrapolated to many different topics, but I think right now the main topic that they are focused on is diversion. So this coming back to the anti-dumping rules and regulatory posture that they're taking. They're like, hey, if we see a large, an influx or an increase in X HTS code, then we need to reach out to the businesses and then open up consultations and find out from local businesses, if this is actually happening and how to avert or divert from dumping products from China.
Okay, yeah, because so you're focusing mainly on China. Do you think the United States is a big topic I mean, obviously it's a big topic anywhere, but the United States, I hear from China because of the whole anti-dumping. Obviously, there's forced labor. There's a lot going on with China. But when it comes to the US, is it the same kind of thinking, or like what is the thought process when it comes to their products? Because I know.
Well, the U.S. doesn't manufacture a whole lot. I mean, I don't think that the EU, and I feel like I'm not really sure if I should have just said that, but manufacturing left the U.S. in the 80s. I had this long conversation with my dad about this, like how like Levi jeans, which is like so American, guys, like Europeans love Levi jeans, but how Levi jeans aren't even produced in the U.S. anymore. Their last production site was actually, I think, in San Antonio, Texas, which is very close to where I'm from. They left in like the 90s or the 2000s. Like it was like over. Like there's not a whole lot of manufacturing in the U.S. But I don't think that right now that the EU is, their top surveillance is, anti-dumping from the U.S. It really is focused on China because China is now going to be looking for new buyers or new places to unload their material, right? Otherwise, they have to pull back on their manufacturing and on their exports, right? Which would, it's like a whole economic crash for them if they had to go down that valley, right? Or down that alley. But So the EU right now, I think, like I said, this only came out last week. Right now, they're looking at the diversion and really protecting from or having a proactive approach to anti-dumping. And they also they've been pretty consistent about coming out with new anti-dumping provisions. So if they see an increase, they're like, okay, let's talk to the locals. Do we need to put something in place? They're very active on this, and they're not, so bureaucratic on it.
It sounds so community based. Like that's what I had, like, right? Very different approach than, like what we see here in the United States. Also, what about exports and imports? So do you think, I'm not sure, I'm not familiar if you export more than you import, but would you say your exports have decreased to the United States within the past few months?
No, I'm first. I'm not like I wouldn't say like decrease because again, we don't have a load of. We're not quite subjected to a trade war with the U.S. right now, right?
Even though it seems like that, by the way, in the news, it does seem like that. The way they make it seem is like a world is ending for Europe.
Yeah.
Lutnick just said the trade, obviously there's trade deals coming and the Europe is at the very last of it, very bottom of it.
Oh yeah, I think it's because Europe has already, Europe has already reviewed and are in discussions and have reached the regulatory posture. I mean, I'm sorry, they've already reached their countermeasures. So I think that the negotiations are not going in the way that the U.S. would like because the EU is like, hey, this is what we're going to propose, and I don't think the U.S. really wants to meet there. I'm not in those rooms, so I don't really know what's happening in those rooms. But what I can see is that the EU is being proactive. They are communicating with their local businesses. They are consulting with local businesses. They have regular meetings with local business to get their feedback. So that's completely different than what you're seeing in the US, where the administration makes a decision and then they put it out and they're like, they don't even know how to implement a lot of these things. I think that's where trade compliance people are like, wait, how do we do this, guys? Like overnight, we just had to change de minimis, or overnight, we just had to change a tariff, or, it's just like so much that's happening that they can't keep up, right? And it's the exact opposite here, where you have a lot of feedback and buy-in from the local businesses. You also see the WTO, which is the World Trade Organization here, based in beautiful Switzerland. If you ever want to come over, it's so nice. The WTO is very active right now, and I've seen a lot of WTO filings coming down. Also, another thing that's really interesting here in the EU is free trade agreements. So again, here's the preventative posture that they're taking. They just last week, there was a new free trade agreement, either open or closed. I feel like it was closed with Qatar. So I'm seeing free trade agreements rolling out like Tic Tacs.
Really? That is
Yes,
so opposite
they have.
to the US.
Huh?
So opposite to the US.
Exactly. They're like, well, because the EU is like, okay, well, if the US isn't going to be buying our things because they now have this tariff or we can't sell them there, we need to build our relationships with other countries. Canada was another big one. Canada and the EU also in a free trade agreement that they're trying to bolster and really keep those trade lanes open. So right now, Canadians and Europeans are like,
Isn't it so sad though, because Canada's right here. Like we would have, if we had a free trade agreement right now here, I mean, wow, that would be great. That I'm just also, guys, I'm just questioning. Like obviously everything I'm saying is my own opinion and like, and what I think of things. Anyone can chime in, and if you have something different to say, please say it, because I love to hear opinions. Like it's no, I do. It's great, but like I'm just confused how EU, who's so far, has a great, I mean, relationship with Canada, while the US is struggling to have that relationship with Canada. And every country struggles. I'm not saying Europe is like the holy the holy continent right now, right? But it's just crazy to see how different things are. The only trade agreement, I think, which wasn't even a true trade agreement we've had recently, was the UK one. I think that was the latest one, UK and the US. So that's really all I remember. And it wasn't even it wasn't a free trade agreement or anything.
I heard there's a lot of speculation on the output of that free trade agreement.
There's just so much happening that it just leaves it behind. We're like forgot about it because then right now there's something else in the works, and then the minimum stop. Yeah. So it's a little crazy. But the insights that you gave of Europe, I had no idea. I really didn't, because when you read the news, it's just, or hear the news or whatever you do, it's just so different.
Yeah, and that's a little bit of the unfortunate part, right? At a time, and this is why, I'm also, as you had mentioned earlier, I started ETA, the European Trade Association, is for these type of situations where we have a lot of information that is changing on a regular basis. We have a lot of professionals, trade compliance professionals here in the EU that do not have a single source to go to have valuable resources, valuable connections. It's a real big gap that I'm seeing here. And so I agree, like what you're seeing in the media might not always reflect about what's actually happening on the ground. And so I would like to see, so they always say, be the change you want to see. So that's what I'm trying to be. I want to provide this space for European trade professionals to share their knowledge, to debate about topics, to find friends within the industry. There's that networking aspect. We always like to connect. The EU is quite segmented. So, if we can have a single source where we come together, share information, and build off of that together to, what do they say? Two minds are better than one. That's the type of space that we're trying to provide. And that would also provide the US a single place to go to for, real information on the ground, like what's actually happening in the EU that's not being, dramatized by the US media.
That you're saying that, because I think that's one thing I truly see in the United States is the community aspect of trade. We have all these different places they can go to. They have great resources. I mean, while they're bombarded with changes and I mean late nights and all those things, they are able to come together and they have places where they can go. And Simply Trade obviously is also one of them, but there's so many associations where they can go to for brokers, NCBFAA, that's a good one. But sorry if I didn't mention, there's so many. But I think that's what we would need in the Europe. And I'm so glad you started something like that, especially if you're able to talk to associations here, like the communication would just be so much better.
I agree. Our jobs are global. And I know that it's been very much focusing at a singular level because you see the U.S. moving in a protectionist manner, right? So it's like, what's the U.S. doing? What's the U.S. doing? But the U.S. is part of, and I think that's what we're seeing around the world, and why you see a lot of countries kind of responding in the way that they are. Like, we're all connected, like through trade. We are in global trade. So if you can connect with colleagues, meaning Europeans, if Europeans can connect with colleagues in Canada, can connect with colleagues in the US and in Asia in a manner that really propels the industry, that's really that's our vision, right? Like, I have a co-founder, so that's the things that we talk about, like trying to be magnets to bring all these people together to share like real insights into things rather than the sensationalized media that's being put out there, right? And how do you also take that and how do you build, like, what should we be doing, right? What should we be doing in these times? It's like really trying.
I love that. But you know what? I love this insights you shared on Europe. And I mean, we went into just one sector, which is kind of like the respondents of what's happening right now to the US, to China. And I think those are great insights because really I had no idea. And I think so many people they don't know what's going on over there because we have so much other stuff to deal with here, unfortunately. but we'll probably have another segment of this, and maybe we'll try to do this monthly because it's such a good conversation to have. And I think this is great for Europeans as well as, people from the United States, as well as anyone really on this earth. Again, we said global trade. So I want to thank you so much for coming on, Bonnie. And this wasn't the last you've heard of her. Don't worry, guys. Don't miss her too much. She'll be back. Anyways, I'm closing it off here. And I want to thank everyone for listening, for your continuous listening. I want to hear from you. What do you think? What are your thoughts on this? And other than that, I wish you a great week. I'm going to the Coldplay concert.
Ooh.
That will be fun. Yes, I'm very excited for that. And that's really all I have to say. So wishing you guys a happy week. Not too hot maybe, because mine is like 105 here right now, unfortunately. But, we'll push through it. Life is great. So yeah, we'll talk next week, guys, and see you back on Monday.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest in the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.